Money Galore, Chapter 2. Some weeks later, Mr. Benjibiase was sitting at leisure in his office. It was late afternoon. The day session was over. He looked fairly contented. He had been to Accra and had been assured that, even in spite of economies, his school ran into a deficit. The department might step in to bail it out. On certain conditions, of course. He was expected to introduce some stringent economies. The boys must do some practice farming so that they can supply their own vegetable requirements. They must raise poultry for egg and meat. They could do some fishing. They must lay the tables and generally do the manual work. It sounded all very well, both in principle and as a form of instruction. The boys approved of the idea and clapped when it was announced to the morning assembly. A third-year boy was so aroused that he involuntarily shouted, "Hip, hip, hip!" And both the pupils and some of the staff roared, "Hooray!" The first-year boys prolonged it for a matter of a full minute. Mr. Benji found this enthusiastic welcome of the new measures heartwarming. He knew, though, that implementing them would not be easy because of the teachers. Experience had taught him that teachers could not be counted among the most conservative creatures on earth. He thought perhaps it was in the nature of their job to do so. Perhaps it was because the young were usually avant-garde, so teachers preferred to anchor them in the certainty of the old before they let loose of the uncertainty of the new. He had observed that teachers, above all, deeply resented the Department of Welfare Services and Pedagogy. Their resentment was such that they would grumble against any directives at all that came from the department, even before they considered its merits. He had often been told that the department had no interest in the welfare of teachers, and teachers quietly refused, as far as possible, to cooperate with it. He knew that the teachers of National Secondary School were no exception to this rule, but they never grudged their service to him or the school, perhaps because their confidence in him was so strong. Kafu found this unsatisfactory. He spent most of his free periods in the staff room, where he either read a novel or talked. He found a close companion there in Reverend Dan Opiasese. Reverend Sese was the chaplain of the school. He had several diplomas in divinity, but no degree. He also taught religion, fancy, and world history to the lower classes. He was 61, but did not want to retire from the service of the school. He had retired, in fact, when he was 60, the mandatory age, but he did so much subtle lobbying that Mr. Benji Biase had to write a strongly worded letter to the department, pleading for a year's extension. The department allowed him to stay on, with the stipulation that a second year's extension would not be conceded since there was no shortage of qualified young people to take his place. Reverend Sese felt the 1 year extension was not enough, and it was all the fault of Mr. Benji Biase. When he told Kafu how Benji Biase had let him down, Kafu said he was not surprised. The man never helps anybody, he said. Of course, Reverend Sese looked vigorous. He was tall and lanky and very nimble on his feet. He was bald and fair-colored and always wore trendy and expensive shirts and ties, but he found it difficult to discard old coats and trousers. He was not fond of clerical garbs. He had a clear voice, which when excited, became a little shrill. He always wore dark glasses, having lost one eye in a fight with his first wife, who was now dead. He had had no child by her. His present wife was 30 years old. He had married her at the age of 17 in her first year at Labone Training College. He had wanted to evade the marriage, but the girl's parents stood firm. They were powerful members of his pastoral circuit, and he capitulated. The church had had to intervene vigorously, and he was posted to National Secondary School to avoid an open scandal. The church also demanded that the government should pay his salary, so he was technically employed as a teacher of religion, fancy, and history. When he told Kafu the story, Kafu thought the church had done well. Reverend Opia Dan Sese neither drank nor smoked in public. He was always smiling and never missed a funeral service. He appeared incapable of doing harm to both those he loved and those he hated. One of his biggest boasts was that he was a pure born and bred fancy. He had very refined manners, and his English was impeccable. Cafu found him a sympathetic listener and a top rate gentleman. It must be said in passing that Reverend Cece had three children, a girl and two boys. The 12-year-old girl, Lucy, had just entered Wesley Girls High School, Cape Coast. The boys were 8 and 4. His wife was expecting a fourth child, the last one. He confided in Kafu, who replied amiably, "Good try." Then, after a pause, Kafu said, intentionally showing disrespect to the headmaster, "Biase must help you get another contract, or you'll be in financial trouble." "Precisely," Reverend Sese said, with a smile that was very near to looking silly. "But have you told him your problems?" "I've told him that I'll face financial embarrassment if I retire now." "Did you give him any details?" "Oh, well, a minister must know how far he should make his private life public." He said this with impressive dignity. "You mean it will be in bad taste to tell him you're still producing children? You suspect he might take advantage of it and lecture you on family planning?" "Exactly. As a minister, I must maintain a certain dignity. I appreciate your understanding." He flashed another charming smile. "And you expect Biase to have enough common sense to appreciate this?" "Yes, indeed. But he doesn't seem to have a subtle enough imagination for my case." "Have you ever come across a headmaster who had a subtle imagination?" "They are either giving orders or taking instructions from the department." "True. I know one or two who are different though. Do you know Mr. Kwabla of Awusu Secondary School?" "No, I don't. But Biase certainly has no imagination. Do you think the department seriously wants the boys to do farming and manual work?" "I'm sure the department means business. I suppose as far as the department is concerned, someone was told to write." "To write that the farming should be done in Cape Coast?" Kafu asked in disgust. "They write to the whole country. Then, when you complain, they wait for 2 months and make an exception in deliberately ambiguous language." Reverend Sessi explained this as if he had made a special study of the behavior of civil servants. "I've been telling the graduate staff not to help with the projects. The non-graduates are so servile they will probably do so. We shall soon get a letter from the department, neither confirming nor denying that we should do farming in Cape Coast. We shall be able to frustrate the whole business." "Well, as a minister of religion, I don't do farming. Of course, in the civil service, they work according to the well-established techniques. You get these bland letters, no responsibility, no commitment." "I have got to change all that," Kafu said slowly, with passion. "How can you change civil service from a secondary school in Cape Coast?" Reverend Sese asked, rather amused. "Politics. Politics is the answer. With politics, you can change anything." "Who told you so?" "I'm a historian, and I know. I'm rereading Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. Politics is the answer. Politics can change anything. Perhaps, but in this country, even politics can tamper with civil service, the medical service, or the church and get away with it." Reverend Sessi spoke with great cocksureness. He ran his right palm over his bald head and then gently tapped the chair on the sides. "Why? If you meddle with the civil service, they will quietly dump you before you were aware you had been dumped. Politicians need medical attention, so I suppose they spare doctors without even knowing they are sparing them. The churches are better organized than political parties and can sow dissatisfaction more efficiently than any other group." Kafu looked a little disconcerted by this brief analysis, but he mustered the courage and said, "Damn it, it's the soldiers and police I fear most. They organize a coup as if it were an ordinary bush parade. They brush off the political life of a man as if it were all a farce." "I know what you mean. Reverend Status stretched his leg out and lowered his head on the backrest cushion. The soldiers and police are disruptive, but essentially they are organizers. In business, you call them executives. The real governor's power is diffuse and subtle, and it lies elsewhere. I watch the public servants in the church. Kafu, I watch them, especially the civil service. That service is like Johnny Walker. It can make you lose your head and slip, but someone else will quickly come around and try it once again. Or Sofu. Kafu addressed Reverend Stacey intimately for the first time. Don't worry about the civil service. If ever I become a minister, I'll purge it. We will trim it and make it work like the private sector. No nonsense. Chia. No nonsense. Exclaimed my mind where to begin, and in the name of the Lord, I won't let the country down. I wish you well, Kafu. I wish you well. Man must live. Man must thrive. I seem to have spent my time just fighting to live, but you are young yet. Yes, young. I can foretell you are achieving more than fighting to live. Osofo, thank you. Thank you. If only Biasi will wish me well as you do. I'm sure he does. He loves people. Are you sure? Yes, I am. But he told me he wasn't interested in anybody. He wouldn't therefore press for my promotion. Maybe. The problem is, he doesn't know how to break rules unless he is mesmerized to do it. You know that urchin, Azankunu in class 3. Biase caught him once at midnight in the lavatory, smoking weed. The rule is that the boy should be dismissed. So Biase was going to dismiss him. But you see, he was the only one who knew of the offense. He could have given the boy a serious warning and hushed it up. But he was going strictly by the rules. So I had to step in when Azankunu appealed to me. He's very bright and is doing very well. He confessed to me later that he wanted to know what weed smoking was all about, and I told him not to be a stupid fool. It could be the beginning of the end for him. Biase doesn't like to deviate from the rules. He rules the school very well, but otherwise, he is a useless fellow. Forgive me, Kafu. I never use strong language. Hey. Osofo, tomorrow I'm going to confront Biase. It's serious. There's no money in teaching. And if you want a promotion, just to earn a little money, you have to appeal to some devil, either here or in the department. It makes me angry. The job carries no respect. I must get out of this rat hole, Osofo. Where to? Things are taking shape. I'll tell you someday. You know the elections will be held in July. So I hear. The country needs intellectuals in parliament, men like myself, who know their books, to reconstruct the country. But I beg your pardon, Reverend Sissy said with a smile. There is nothing to reconstruct in this country. How can you reconstruct something you have not constructed? Oh, so fool. Yes. You know nothing about politics. We are the intellectuals, and we are going to reconstruct the country. Money is what I need to fight the elections, and Biase is in my way. I am going to confront him. Kafu started thinking deeply. They sat quietly, saying nothing for about 5 minutes. Kafu began to doze, and in a few minutes he was snoring heavily. Reverend Sese found this a little embarrassing, so he shook him and asked him to go home. He had some exercises to correct before leaving. Biase was still in his office. A tall form boy, Osei Kwame, who had a pointed head, a thin face, and a flat bottom, knocked and was asked to come in. Osei had throughout his 4 academic years collected prizes in history. He was a good athlete, and his compositions often wore high marks. He always grinned ingratiatingly whenever he saw a master and delighted in talking to them about other masters. He would approach a master and ask casually for an explanation of a problem. When this had been given, he would smile truthfully and ask the master, feigning innocence, what he thought about a certain practice in the school or the performance of another master. especially a new one. If the master was not on his guard and gave an opinion which went against the school administration or a member of staff, Osai would go to the senior housemaster and tell him. If it was something against the administration, the senior housemaster would tell it to Mr. Biase as if he had heard it first. If it was against a member of staff, he would ask Osei Kwame to go and tell Mr. Biase. The senior housemaster liked Osei Kwame and gave him good terminal reports. Mr. Biase had an aversion to both. When Mr. Biase saw Osei Kwame and his facial grin, his strong dislike of the boy welled up in him, but he kept cool and asked, deliberately standing, "What is it, Osei Kwame?" "Say, Mr. Kafu has not been teaching us well." "How is that?" Mr. Biase asked, with a frown to frighten Osei Kwame. "He talks politics all the time, and then crack jokes." "Who takes you in current affairs?" Mr. Kafu said. "Do you know the difference between current affairs and politics?" Mr. Biase asked, hoping to discourage Osei Kwame. "They overlap, sir," Osei Kwame said, with a broad grin, which infuriated Mr. Biase. "But the trouble, sir, is that Mr. Kafu doesn't go by the history syllabus. It's current affairs, politics all the time. And the final exams are due in July, sir." "Anything else?" Mr. Biase asked. "Yes, sir. Mr. Kafu sometimes comes to class drunk." "What?" "Yes, sir. The class can confirm this, sir." "Are you very sure? This is a serious matter." "Yes, sir. Sometimes he comes in 15 minutes late. During the last 2 weeks, he had cut 2 periods, sir." "Is that all?" Mr. Biase asked Osei Kwame in a voice to warn him that enough was enough. "No, sir. Last week, several people who were being mentioned in the press as candidates for the elections visited his flat. A lady Peace Corps teacher stayed in his flat up to midnight last Saturday. His wife had gone. "Shut up, you foul-mouthed wretched little snake. I have a good mind to give you 12 lashes and throw you out of this school. Get out." Osei Kwame's face fell, more out of shock than genuine regret. He quickly ran out of the office, and in 2 seconds his steps had died out along the corridor. Mr. Benjepiase turned over carefully in his mind what he had been told. He knew every bit of it was true, except the Peace Corps story, which was probably nothing but a juvenile misinterpretation of a social visit. He despised Osei Kwame. That boy is absolutely dead. He must have been born out of wedlock. The parents don't live together. Such boys are a complete nuisance in boarding schools. They lie, steal, fight, and never wash. Here is this boy. He knows it's the senior prefect's job to tell me, not his. It's this underhand business I hate most. Kafu is an open troublemaker. But this boy, Osei Kwame, what do I do with him? Lord, what do I do with him? Can I change him? Can I succeed? He heaved a sigh and stared at the photograph of the first headmaster of the school, which hung high up in front of him. There was a knock on the door. It was Kafu. He was in a crumpled, very short white shorts, a colorful Jerome shirt, and a foam rubber sandals. He was smoking Tusker cigarettes. He held a packet of cigarettes and a box of matches in his left hand. There was a copy of the latest issue of the Legon Observer under his left armpit. He held an evening paper, which he had folded thrice in his right hand. His Melton looked like someone who had just taken a lot of beer. He was a little unsteady on his feet. He was smiling defiantly. Mr. Biase spoke first. He forgot to let Kafu tell him what he wanted to see him about. He said, "Kafu, what is this I hear about you?" "Look, Biase, why not let me tell you why I'm here?" "Fair enough, Kafu. Have you written the petition?" "No." "Why not?" "You don't deserve it." "Why?" "Apart from the 7 years required for the post, You haven't demonstrated you can be an efficient assistant headmaster. In my view, your problem is not inability, but willful negligence and blackmail. Kafu, why can't you take interest in your work and in the school? Biase, you are speaking generally. If you had had the discipline of taking a master's degree, you wouldn't have talked loosely like this. What are the specifics? What's the evidence against me? Right now you are drunk. So what? Shouldn't a teacher drink? You go to classes drunk, Kafu. When? And what did you do about it? Mr. Benji Biase. You confide a lot in Reverend Sisse. How do you know? You don't mark exercises. But Biase, for a whole term, you yourself haven't checked whether or not I've marked exercises, have you? You have been telling other staff not to help with the farming and the poultry. This is slanderous. You talk politics in class and crack unnecessary jokes. Have you visited my class recently to check on the truth of what you're saying? Biase, let me tell you this. You know I'm going to stand in the elections, and you hate the idea. You hate me. I know you hate me. You don't like the Liberation Party because you can't match the intellectual excellence of the top crop of its members. But I can advise you, Biase, no matter what people say, only the educated can save this country. And only the educated can ruin this country, Kafu. And only the unrefined intelligent cannot appreciate the potential of the educated, Biase. One thing is clear though, you hate the Liberation Party, and you would like to get rid of me. You want to see me start from this school. You want to stand between me and my ambition, wealth, everything. But none of your stratagems will work. I haven't finished with you yet. Before Mr. Biase could utter a word, Kafu banged the door and laughed loudly as he hurried away along the corridor.